An NBC News exclusive, Debra Lafave, crossing the line. Good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Lauer. So a new school year begins and your teenager comes home talking about how much he likes one of his teachers. Your first thought might be, good, I hope he learned something. But the parents of one 14-year-old in Florida were not happy about what their son was learning from a teacher in his school. Her name was Debra Lafave, and she's one in a string of young female teachers who've admitted having sex with underage male students. Tonight, in an exclusive interview, Debra Lafave tells her side of the story, what she learned in school about herself. What's the reaction you get in the street from people who recognize you? Snickers, stares.
Mothers would hold their children tightly when they saw me.
Obviously, do it in front of you?
Obviously.
People say bad things to you?
That's Debra Lafave.
She's a top contender for the title of America's most notorious school teacher. In 2004, Debra Beasley Lafave was arrested at the home of a middle school student, accused of having sex with him at her apartment, in her car, in her classroom. She was 23. He was 14.
Now to a shocking story. A Florida teacher is facing possible prison time.
She wasn't the first teacher, or the last, to be busted for a liaison with an underage student. But her case created an international sensation.
It was just the intensity of it. My goodness. You know, there was a teacher arrested 2 days after me. And I saw her on TV once.
So why do you think you got all the attention?
I don't know.
I'll say it. Do you think it's because you're pretty?
I think so. And sex sells.
14-year-old boy, a very attractive 23-year-old teacher. He's had sex with you. Weren't you scared to death he would tell someone?
Obviously not, because I did it again.
And again.
And again.
She says to fully understand her, you have to go back years to her childhood in a small town near Tampa, Florida. Her dad worked for the power company. Her mom was a cosmetologist. Debra adored her older sister, Angie.
I loved my big sister. I couldn't go anywhere without her. I loved playing Barbies. I would play school with all my dolls and teach them how to read.
But soon it became apparent that Debbie was a very complicated little girl. Her mother would later write a long account of Debra's childhood, a litany of phobias, panic attacks, and obsessions. And Debra says there was a trauma buried in her past. When you were 13 years old, 8th grade, you were raped by someone you knew. Tell me about that.
The first time that it happened was in school. He forced me into a bathroom and began to rape me. And a teacher walked in, and she let us off the hook.
Well, you say she let us off the hook. I mean, what did you do wrong? Why did she have to let you off the hook?
Well, she had no clue that I was being raped. You know, she, I'm assuming, just thought we were messing around.
Why didn't you say, this boy's raping me?
It just doesn't happen like that. I had a lot of fear. You know, when somebody has that kind of control over you, especially at 13, I didn't tell anybody.
Who was this young man in your life? I mean, was he someone you were close with?
Yeah, he was actually one of my boyfriends. I kind of developed this idea that it was my role. In order to make a man, guy, boy happy, I had to do my part, which was pleasing him in that way.
But you felt it was your duty. You didn't really feel as if you had a choice.
Exactly.
By age 15, she was drinking heavily. She developed an eating disorder. So, I mean, as an outsider looking in, life was a bit of a mess.
At that point, I had already tried to commit suicide twice, too.
How did you try to commit suicide?
One time was taking a lot of pills, and the second time was slitting my wrists.
Were you one of these girls that people had walked up to on the street and say, you should model, you're very pretty, you should model, things like that?
Yeah, I thought it would be a great way to make extra cash. She wouldn't be a model for long.
Debra majored in English at the University of South Florida with the goal of becoming a teacher. She stopped her heavy drinking, got into a steady relationship, maintained a high B average, but she still found herself crying sometimes for no apparent reason. A friend finally told her she needed to see a psychiatrist.
They thought that it was just depression, and they put me on Zoloft at that time.
How did that work for you?
At first, I can remember saying, I'm not crying anymore. You know, I'm happy. And after that, it kind of just, it felt like my body became immune to it, and it didn't work anymore.
So the depression came back.
Mm-hmm.
Then perhaps the hardest blow of all. In 2001, Debra's beloved older sister Angie was killed by a drunk driver. Debra was devastated, and today she wonders, could her sister have saved her from herself?
I think about if she was here, what I have done, what I did.
Why would it have been different?
Because she knew me well, and she always could tell if I was doing something that I shouldn't be doing.
In 2002, despite all her troubles, Debra graduated from college and took a job as an 8th grade reading teacher at Greco Middle School in Temple Terrace, a suburb of Tampa. By all accounts, her first year went well.
Like I said, I used to play school with my dolls, and after I got raped, I wanted to be able to educate kids on issues like rape and all the things that I never learned about. And
you have to know it sounds ironic when you say I wanted to educate children on issues like rape.
Oh, yeah.
And how things turned out.
Oh, yeah.
Debra Lafave could not afford to get caught. The middle school teacher had been having sex with a 14-year-old boy at her school. But rather than trying to keep her affair secret, she seemed to be flaunting it. And people were starting to suspect that something was wrong.
He said something along the lines of, I think Debbie's having an affair, to my mom. And he thought it was with one of my fellow teachers.
He never dreamed it was with one of your students?
Never.
But that's exactly what happened. Debra Lafave, a 23-year-old reading teacher, was having an affair with a 14-year-old student at her middle school in a suburb of Tampa. She'd already performed oral sex on him. Now, 10 days later, June 14th, she invited him to help her clean her classroom and crossed yet another line.
And that was the first time.
You had intercourse with him at school?
Yes.
School was out, and Debra grew even more reckless. The next day, she drove the student to Ocala, 100 miles north, to visit his 15-year-old cousin. They picked up the cousin at his home. Debra gave him the car keys. Then she climbed in back and had sex with the 14-year-old. You had sex with this student while his cousin drove the car. You know, even if he's not 14 and you're 23, even if he's not your student and you're a married woman, it's a pretty brazen thing to do. Were you scared?
It didn't even bother me. And like I said, I am the most modest person, even today. Like, if I'm in my bathing suit, I want a cover-up.
It seems like there are a lot of contradictions here.
Oh,
because
there is.
On the one hand, you're saying you're a modest person, yet you've had sex in a car with a 14-year-old while his cousin's driving.
I think that's different, and I was 18.
2 days later, June 17th, she and the boy again drove to Ocala and picked up the cousin. They all went to a park. While the cousin made a phone call, Debra and the boy again had sex in the back of Debra's SUV. How did you explain yourself when you would show up in Ocala? Here's a place 100 miles from where you live. How would you explain why you were there?
Nobody really, I mean, all of his friends that were out there were, you know, high-fiving him and saying, oh, yeah, she is hot, blah, blah, blah. You know, so there was really no one that I saw. I didn't know anybody.
But those friends are going home and telling their friends, hey, this young man in question is being visited by his, in your word, hot teacher. You have to know this story is going to get around sooner or later.
Well, like I said, that's a fog that I was in. The only way that I can describe that is I felt that I was a peer of theirs.
At any point during sex with this student or after sex with this student, did you say, in the eyes of the law, I just committed rape?
No. I don't think no, I didn't say that.
But very soon she'd be hearing it. Debra had been spotted by the mother of one of the cousin's friends. She, in turn, told the cousin's mom. The cousin's mom calls the student's mom and says, this teacher, this beautiful teacher, is hanging out with your son.
Mm-hmm.
When did you find out that you'd been spotted up there and that these phone calls had occurred?
That day.
And what'd you do about it?
Nothing.
She also called the boy's mother, to smooth things over.
I was more thinking of it as being a young girl who just got caught with her boyfriend, and we shouldn't piss our parents off.
It's okay.
I didn't mean to say that.
But Debra didn't know that the boy's mother had already confronted him. He'd told her about the sex. She'd called the police. Soon, detectives questioned the boy, confirmed his story, and had him call Debra while they listened in.
You enjoyed yourself yesterday.
I did. Did you?
Yeah.
So it's not over?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Why couldn't you just said go? Not yet. That kind of sucked.
You know, clearly, to me, that sounds very childish. It's not over. I mean, that's not something that an adult would say.
Do you remember making those calls?
Yeah.
The detectives had the boy call Debra again, this time to invite her to his house. She made him promise his mom wasn't home.
Positive.
Yeah.
Promise?
Yeah.
Pinky promise. Say pinky promise.
Yeah.
All right.
When Debra arrived at the appointed time on June 21st, 2004, the police were waiting. She claims that even then, she was still oblivious to the idea that she'd committed a crime.
It took about maybe 5 seconds, and my car was surrounded. And at first, my immediate thought was, did I just run a stop sign?
Did the world crumble at that moment? No. You're still in this state of...
I was mad at the fact that they wouldn't let me get my purse out of the car. In fact, I was just so arrogant. Just so... God, I shouldn't be back here.
I didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly.
During their investigation, police had asked the boy questions to prove that Debra was his sex partner. He described her tattoos, her tan lines, and another, even more intimate detail. Now, the police needed photos to verify his descriptions.
They put me in stirrups like you would for...
A gynecological exam.
Exactly. And I can remember just shaking and trying as hard as I could to clench my legs together to keep them shut. Forcing my legs apart and doing that. It was complete violation. They could have
It's
had...
evidence, Debbie.
But you do understand that they could have had me standing up against a wall.
There are some people out there who say this is every 14-year-old boy's fantasy. Did you hear that?
Yeah. I just think it's stupid. I can't even think of any other word to describe it. I think it's ridiculous.
Soon, authorities in Ocala, where the boy's cousin lived, filed another set of charges for the sex acts that took place there. If convicted, Debra now faced up to 30 years in prison, and she faced the destruction of her marriage.
I spent the night in jail, and then the next day is when I actually saw him. So he knew.
What did he say to you?
Right away, he was just very angry, and I can remember bawling my eyes out. When he was walking out the door, I think I literally grabbed onto his leg and squeezed, and he was dragging me on the floor because I just didn't want him to leave.
You knew at that moment your marriage was over?
I knew it by his, the way that he reacted to it.
Do you know your career was over?
Well, they told me, so yeah.
It seemed like it would take a miracle to keep her out of prison. The facts in the case were overwhelmingly against her. Debra's attorney, John Fitzgibbons, planned a novel defense.
Here we have a woman that by every societal standard can get a date, can get a man. Yet she destroyed her career, destroyed her marriage. I believe the only logical reason why Debra Lafave did what she did was because of her mental illness.
According to 3 psychiatrists hired by the defense, Debra has bipolar disorder. Dr. Eric Hollander, who's not associated with the case, is chair of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Medical School in New York City.
When women become hypersexual, the number one disorder really that seems to drive that hypersexuality in women is bipolar disorder.
But is bipolar disorder an explanation or an excuse?
You know what? I don't want to blur the lines between doing something as heinous as what I did and being bipolar. But yes, symptoms of bipolar definitely contributed to my mind frame.
Did you know what you were doing was wrong?
At the time, I don't think I did. Obviously not, because I wouldn't have done it.
But in his sworn statement to investigators, the 14-year-old said she told him something quite different.
Didn't you say that one of the things that turns me on is knowing that I'm not supposed to be having sex with you?
You know what? There's a few comments that I have heard, and this is the first time that I'm speaking out, that are not true, period.
Okay, so you never said to him, it's a turn on to me because I know we are not supposed to be having sex?
Absolutely. No way. I never, ever, ever said that.
Debra Lafave, blonde, beautiful, bipolar. Would her explanation be enough to keep her out of prison?
It was nerve-wracking still, because I really, honest to God, I battled with, should I go?
So you actually thought, should I go to prison?
Yeah, pay a debt. I mean, look, I did this.
If convicted, schoolteacher Debra Lafave faced up to 30 years in prison for having sex with a 14-year-old student. Her lawyer planned an insanity defense, but he knew a trial would be risky.
It was clear that there were a lot of people that felt there was no crime here. And conversely, there were some people that felt it was a horrific crime.
Finally, in November 2005, her lawyer cut a deal with prosecutors in Tampa.
Here comes Lafave.
Debra would plead guilty to lewd and lascivious battery, but be sentenced to house arrest, no jail time.
I have in my right hand, ma'am, a plea form. Did you talk to your lawyer about it?
Yes, sir.
Do you understand it?
Yes, sir.
Did you sign it?
Yes, sir.
There were still charges pending in Ocala, and the judge there rejected a plea deal, saying her crime demanded she do time. He scheduled a trial. But then, a big surprise.
My lawyer, John, called me, and he said, they dropped the charges. I was like, what? They dropped the charges. The state dropped the charges.
The victim's mother had told prosecutors she did not want her son to have to testify, did not want to put a teenage boy under the hot lights that followed Debra Lafave everywhere.
I think ultimately the media intensity was a benefit to us.
Infamy has its privileges.
I called my fiance, and I was crying and ecstatic. First I called him crying because they rejected the deal, and then I called him crying because I was so happy. It was just like two extremes. The past 2 years have been hard on all parties involved. I pray with all my heart that the young man and his family will be able to move on with their lives.
About the experience you had with rape in middle school and the impact that has had on your life and your relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So how is what happened to you different than what you did to this 14-year-old boy?
I think first, my rape was a violent rape.
So because yours was not a violent rape of this student, you think that's a big difference?
Well, it's a difference. I don't know if it's a big difference. You know, a 14-year-old 10 years ago is different than a 14-year-old today.
Not in the eyes of the law.
Right, not in the eyes of the law. He consented, but I should have been the one to say, look, you are a kid, and that this is not a good idea, whether you want it or not.
You should have said it on a number of occasions.
Oh, yeah.
You should have said it when you first started flirting with him.
Yeah.
And you clearly should have said it before you had sex with this young man.
Clearly.
How do you think this is going to impact his life?
I think he's going to have a hard time trusting women one day. I'm sure he has to be living with the guilt of, quote-unquote, ratting me out.
By court order, you cannot have any contact with him.
No.
What would you say to him if you could see him?
Oh, God, I don't even think about him, and I definitely would apologize. I mean, I don't have anything to say to him. I don't have any harsh words or even good words.
You know, you hear some people say she should be in prison.
Mm-hmm.
That if the roles were reversed, and if you were a man who was 24 and had sex with a 13 or 14-year-old girl, you'd be in prison. How do you feel about that?
I think I should be in jail.
You think you should be?
Yeah. By the standards, what I did, that's the law. I should have got jail time.
In the end, even the notorious teacher herself does not know if justice was served.
So do you think it's fair? Do you think the deal you eventually came up with is fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair. You know, I follow all the guidelines that, you know, sex offenders follow. I can't see children. I have to stay 1,000 feet, or live rather 1,000 feet away from, you know, churches, schools, which is, you know, for obvious reasons, that's a good thing.
Right.
You know, I follow those rules. I have that label, and if I was reckless and, you know, violating my house arrest and going to bars, and that's one thing, but I was a law-abiding citizen, and I am again, and that's that.
So you check in with a probation officer every day?
Once a week, he comes by my house,
right,
and once a week I have to go to his office. So I see him about twice a week, and if I need something, you know, of course I call him, or, you know, he can stop by at any point in time that he wants to.
Right. House arrest. I mean, a lot of people, Debbie, probably thought you should be in prison right now.
Right.
And instead you were under house arrest for 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Describe that to me. I mean, I think a lot of people think, well, that's pretty nice. You get to be in your house, you know, and you got your TV and you got your food and the refrigerator. And so what's house arrest like?
It's more like I can definitely live without shopping and going out to the movies and socializing. Emotionally, it's very hard. It's very easy to get depressed, to have feelings of worthlessness, that you're never going to have the kind of future that you once had. You know, I'm allowed to go shopping for necessity only, usually once or twice a month. I have to go to a class for sex offenders and work, and that's pretty much it. My parents actually put up a privacy fence, and it's pretty secluded. So yes, I'm able to go outside, do gardening, yard work, what have you.
And part of the stipulations of your agreement that you made, you cannot go near schools. You can't really be near children within, I think, 1,000 feet, right?
I work at a restaurant, so it's impossible for me to dodge every child that, you know, comes in the door. But I do not serve them, and I do not make eye contact with them.
So in other words, if a family comes into your section in the restaurant, and they're young kids, which probably happens all the time, you don't wait on that table?
All the hostesses know that I can't wait on children, or I don't even know if it's I can't wait on children, I choose not to, and they know not to seat them in my section.
Give me a sense, Debbie, of what these 2 years have been like for you.
Therapy, and more therapy. A lot of my freedom has been taken away from me, but I have grown a lot, and I have received the proper medication to balance me chemically, and I'm happy for the first time in a really long time.
So you're happy. You know, a lot of people would find that surprising. You're happy. You're under house arrest. You've got probation following that. As you mentioned, your freedom has been severely limited, and yet you say you're happy.
Well, the lack of freedom, rather, has humbled me.
So what is the one thing you want people to know about you?
That I committed a sex offense, but I'm not a sex offender, even though I'm labeled as that. I made a really, really, really bad choice.
You don't see yourself as a predator.
It's hard. It is so hard because I lived 23 of my years of my life, you know, knowing who I was. I was a kind-hearted person who loved children, who would never, you know, do anything to break the law. I was a good person, and then now everything has just changed. So it's just really hard for me to accept that.
By the way, by law, Debra Lafave cannot profit from her crime, so she can't sell the rights to her story, and she has no plans to write a book about her case. She's currently working as a waitress. So what do you think? Did the punishment fit the crime?